My name is Jon Haidt. I'm a social psychologist at the NYU Stern School of Business. When Deborah first invited me to speak here, she suggested that I tell some stories about morality. Now, I'm not really a storyteller. I'm a scientist, an experimentalist. I do experiments to figure out the basic mechanisms of moral judgment. But there is actually a story that I've been trying to tell. And it is the story of how we became human, which I think is the story of how we got morality. Now, what does it mean to be human? That's part of the point of this conference today. One approach taken by some philosophers is to say, bird gotta fly, fish gotta swim, human gotta what? Okay, burn? What was that? Just think for yourself. How would you answer that question? What is it that we have to do such that if we can't do that, we don't have a full, satisfying life? Okay, good. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it at the end. Love as a form of connection. So I'm going to tell you now the most amazing story that I know, and it is a story of increasing connectivity. It's a story of how one species of primate, which is not very good at cooperating, transformed itself into a species of primate that is very good at cooperating. Hunter-gatherers can cooperate very well in on a small scale, and transformed itself into people that can cooperate on very large scales and create large-scale civilizations and monuments, and ultimately into people who can live in gigantic democracies and do something as silly and noble and inspiring as connecting hands across the entire continental United States. So here's how the story goes. It's a story with 8 chapters. Chapter 1. Something stands up, it rises up, and this happens between 7 and 5 million years ago. This is a picture of a chimpanzee. Chimpanzees walk on all fours, they walk on their knuckles. This is a photo of a bonobo. Bonobos usually walk on all fours too, but when they do stand up, they're much better at it. Their posture is better. They look more bipedal. We don't know what the common ancestor of all 3 species are, them and us, but it was probably something more or less like one of them. Whatever it was that first stood up and became fully bipedal, by 3 million years ago, we get Lucy, we get Australopithecines, who are completely bipedal. This freed their hands so they could make more tools, but actually, we don't really find tools in the archaeological record. This creature should not be thought of as an early human. This is just an ape that happens to walk on 2 feet. But then we get to chapter 2. For some reason, brain size doubles relatively rapidly. Some think it was to make better tools, to take advantage of tool using. But a more common view nowadays is that it was actually social cognition. It was mastering the social world led to brain increase, and that then made them better tool users. So we begin to get, suddenly, with the brain increase, we get all these simple stone tools, and then those tools get a little better. We get these clearly created hand axes that are really quite beautiful and symmetrical. But then something really amazing happens. Nothing. For 1 million years, nothing, no change. You find the same hand axe all over Africa, Southern Europe, Asia. Now think about the things you've seen in museums. Lots of cultures have invented swords and teapots, but it changes from century to century and land to land. So once again, this is not us. This is not humans. These are not humanly creative or inventive creatures. There's no cumulative cultural learning. And then this brings us finally to chapter 3, which is the pivot of the story. This is the most important chapter. This is where we really see something becoming human. Homo heidelbergensis, the bones first discovered in Heidelberg, but actually they're all over the old world. This is the first creature that tamed fire. They had hearths. They made spears. And what that tells us is that they hunted large game. And if they hunted large game, then they must have been very cooperative with a very good division of labor, probably along gender lines, because you have males working together to bring down large animals, bringing them back to a central campsite where the women are working together to raise children, forage in the area, cook and provision the group. So if you have large-scale cooperation with division of labor, then you must have shared intentionality. Okay, that's not an obvious term. What does that mean? Let me explain, because this is the key, this is the transitional moment for our species. This is Michael Tomasello. He's a psychologist who works in Germany. He's American, works in Germany. And he studies chimpanzees or various primates and human children and looks at their cognitive abilities and how they're different. So he did this amazing, So he looks at how they develop and then veer off on different trajectories. I saw him give a talk once where he said, it is inconceivable that you would ever see two chimpanzees working together to carry a log. Now, chimpanzees are so smart. They can deceive each other. They can deceive humans. They have theory of mind. But what they can't do is put their minds together. Why not? Tomasello conducted some really wonderful studies in which he created a set of tasks that he could give to to children and to chimpanzees, adult chimpanzees, that were very similar in form across the species. And he could look to see who's able to solve them. Let me show you his model. So here's what humans can do. They can say, I have a goal. I want to open this box. They can say, I have this tool. In this case, there's a key in his hand. This is a figure from one of Tomasello's papers. And then in their heads, they can model, they can simulate what would happen if I use this tool in this way or that way. So humans are great at this, and actually chimpanzees are too. Chimpanzees are superb tool users. But here's where the difference comes. What if you have two individuals? Now here humans can do this. They can say, we have a challenge. We want to open this box. And we have these two tools. Looks like a kind of a blade and a key. And what humans next do is they say, what do we have? How should we do this? And they know that the other one is also working with them to solve the problem. This is where the difference lies. So one piece of evidence that Tomasello gives us is that the eyes changed radically. In other animals, they don't want to give away where they're looking. That could alert another animal to where the food is. So chimpanzees and other primates have no whites of their eyes. You can't really tell. But humans evolved whites of the eyes. Now, why would you do that? Why would you voluntarily give away information? Because once we began to share intentions, that made you a better partner. You are now a better partner to reach superb, productive, excellent ends, and you were more likely chosen as a partner. So we evolved to connect. We evolved to share our intentions and work together. Okay, and finally, here are the experiments that Tomasello did. So a treat, a piece of food is put on a table. The chimp wants it. You give him a stick. And the first time you give him a stick, he can figure it out. I can use the stick to get the food. So chimps are really smart. Kids are really smart. He made up about 20 different tasks like this. And here's the data. When you average across all the tasks, you find that the kids are solving about 70% of them. The chimpanzees the same. The orangutans are just a tiny bit lower, but they're all within the realm of statistical insignificant differences. So there's really no difference on the physical tasks. They're all really smart creatures. But then he invented about 20 social tasks, which you can only solve by connecting yourself to another mind. So here's an example. In one, you'll see the experimenter puts an object under a cup. The animal or kid doesn't know which cup, but she's directing. She points. She nods, she looks. And you'll see the kid cues into what she's doing and saying. She's looking, she's pointing. The kid even nods to acknowledge. I connect, I acknowledge. You're communicating with me, you're telling me, I'm going for it, there it is. Okay, easy. The kids are great at this sort of stuff. Now here's the chimpanzee. Tomasello put videos up, so you'll see the chimpanzee actually does solve the problem, but he's at chance. You'll notice that the chimpanzee doesn't actually look at the experimenter. He makes no effort to get information. He's just moving around. He's going to reach through. So this demonstrates that the chimpanzee can actually get the food, but on average, they were at chance. See, she's pointing, she's calling, she's looking, and he happens to have been there, so he picked that one. But if you average across all the trials, here's the data. The kids do great, even better here than they did on the physical tasks. But the chimps and the orangutans are at chance. They are no good at this. They can't get it, no matter how, they're so smart, but they don't get that she's communicating and we're solving this together. They can't do that. So that's the Rubicon. Once we got that, once we could put our minds together to solve problems, now all hell breaks loose. Changes come very, very rapidly. We get language. You cannot have language before you have shared intentionality. Because a word is not a relationship between a sound and an object. A word is a relationship between people. It's an agreement among people about what we are going to call the important things in our world. So only then can you get language. Then you get cooperative hunting even more. You get cooperative foraging and rearing. You get division of labor. And therefore, you get people living for the first time in what you could call a moral matrix. There's a wonderful quote from Clifford Geertz, my favorite quote in the social sciences. He says, "Man is an animal suspended in webs of significance that he himself has spun." Okay, and that's rather like this interesting quote from William Gibson in Neuromancer in The Matrix. The Matrix is a consensual hallucination. And that's what society is. We are always creating consensual hallucinations and then living in them. So once we do that, once we start living inside a moral matrix, now you get gene-culture coevolution, because we now have culture. And that culture feeds back so that certain traits, heritable traits, are more adaptive, being more sociable, being able to control yourself, being less violent. So we tame ourselves. Human beings get tamer. We get less fierce. We get more cooperative. We develop a conscience. We develop the emotion of shame, as described in this book by Christopher Bohm. And once we get better at living in groups, what's one of the main things groups do? They can now compete with other groups to take valuable territory and valuable resources. So we begin to get the coevolution of tribal sentiments. That is, tribes create these cultural constructions, such as initiation rites, let's say, but then that selects for genes that make brains that fit in. And before you know it, we become this incredibly tribal, groupish species, the sort that Alexandra is studying. This is also the period at which religion becomes a universal feature of human tribes. And a way to think about religion, the way I think about it, it's not the way the new atheists think about it. It's not just a quirk or a fluke or a mistake. Religion is an evolutionary adaptation for binding people together into cooperative moral communities. The metaphor that I like to use is that gods are like maypoles. When you circle around a maypole and everybody has a thread or a string, you weave a cloth. You get e pluribus unum. From many, you get one. And this is why we love to do things in groups. We love to feel that we are part of something larger. So once we get this groupishness down, this ability to work together and bind ourselves into groups, we are invincible. We explode out of Africa in very short order, cover the entire globe, drive all other hominids to extinction. Nobody can stand up to us once we have these moral communities. And then in a few places where it looks as though the gods got a little bigger, it's now seeming as though actually big gods came before agriculture, not the other way around, as we're seeing in Turkey. Once you get agriculture developing, then you get, in just a few thousand years, we get much larger groups that are generating a surplus. We get cities. We get Babylon. We get Rome. We get Tenochtitlan. We get all the giant cities building upon the wealth of agriculture. And this generates, again, wealth and surplus, but we don't get a quantum leap again until the 16th century. It's only once we get these innovations in finance and law, the development of the first corporations and corporate law in Holland and England. Now you get this gigantic spike in the conditions of the planet. This is the most amazing graph I have ever seen. What this shows, I'll walk you through it, this shows the average per capita income in today's dollars on all the major regions of the world. From the year 0, I've graphed up through 1950. And what you see is that the blue line is Western Europe. You see a slight jump up once they get mercantile capitalism. You get trade to the Indies, so that you're moving stuff around where it's more valuable. You get a little bump up in Western Europe. But you don't really get the giant spike until you get the Industrial Revolution. And look what happens. The green line is the United States. It goes from subsistence level, poverty. Most people were just barely getting by. It shoots up to about $8,000, $9,000 of present value by 1950. Look at that. Look at that transformation from 1800 to 1950 compared to all of previous human history. And if that isn't the most amazing graph you've ever seen, look what happened since 1950. And it's not just the US. It's Western Europe. It's Japan. And you see China and India poking their heads up there. And if somebody does this graph again in 10 years, they'll be right up there. And what happens when China, India, and the rest of the third world masters capitalism, creates vast wealth, and joins the Western countries and Japan up there? What happens? Well, we all live happily ever after, right? Not quite. Because there are a few remaining problems. Many of you have seen this graph. This is the graph of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And obviously, capitalism and the Industrial Revolution is changing the planet. That cannot be denied. in ways that could potentially be catastrophic. And it's not going to all be peace and happiness. There are a few, I won't call them mentally unstable, I'll call them strategically, I'll just call them strategic. People who are figuring out clever ways of getting nuclear weapons, and they could well use them. So there are problems, but if you step back and you take the big view, almost everything is getting amazingly better. Many of you have heard of Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and over and over again he documents how nasty and brutish and violent and cruel life was, even up to a few hundred years ago, certainly in the medieval period. And Pinker shows that violence is plummeting. Now, this is a logarithmic graph. So, so the change when you go from pre-state societies to modern societies is on the order of 99% decrease in violence. Unbelievable decreases in violence. We can see those numbers here in the United States. These are the rate. And again, all of Pinker's numbers, it's crucial that all of his numbers are per capita. Because as the population grows, of course, there's more conflict, as you saw in Alexandra's slide. There are more conflicts, there are more wars in some ways, but they tend to be actually less deadly, and per capita, things are getting safer and safer and safer. The rate of homicide has plunged in the last few decades. The rate of rape has plunged even more steeply. Genocide has just about disappeared on this planet. So obviously the 20th century was the worst century ever for genocide. But actually, the percentage of people who died of murder was the lowest in the 20th century compared to all previous centuries when you do it per capita. And when you look at what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years, yes, you see a little bump for Rwanda, but it's barely noticeable compared to the point is genocide is almost gone on this planet. And you put it all together, this is the issue that I cared about most when I was in junior high school. We all thought in the 70s, oh, if only we could find a cure for world poverty. Well, actually, that graph I showed you of capitalism generating wealth, it's curing world poverty. When China and India are no longer poor, this is what happens. These are the rates, the percentage living in extreme poverty in 1981, 1990, 1999, and 2010. And it's going down everywhere. Sub-Saharan Africa is slower, but the trends are turning in the right direction now. So let's look at our crystal ball. What is next? What is next for our species? Of course, it's almost impossible to predict the future, but the trends are so powerful that I'm going to go out on a limb and make 8 predictions, or 8 or 9 predictions here, as to what's going to happen over the next 100 years. I'm going to guess that there's going to be even more cooperation. That's not much of a risky guess. It's almost certain to happen. I'm going to guess there's going to be less violence, that there's going to be less poverty, that as wealth increases, you get less poverty, you get more education. And what happens when women get educated? The fertility plunges from 6 or 8 per capita to 2 or less than 2. And demographers are now predicting that the rate of increase is slowing down already. We're going to top out sometime in the next 50 to 100 years from now, we'll top out. And in the next century, there's going to be such a plunge of population on this planet. It's going to be economically very, very difficult, but it's going to be, of course, environmentally wonderful. So we're going to continue to have technological improvement. We're going to continue to see ever-spreading human rights, encompassing women, as we've done in the West, women, now gay people, people of various races. And I think it's fair to predict we'll have more connectivity. So if you put this all together, I actually think it will be happily ever after. Not perfect, but compared to what we were all thinking 10, 20, 30 years ago, I think it is. So to conclude, being human. I asked you at the beginning, human gotta what? Well, here's my answer. Maybe, I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about it in the discussion, but here's my answer. Bird gotta fly, fish gotta swim, human gotta live in a shared moral matrix. Cooperate and compete. We love doing both. That's why we invented sports. Human gotta connect and relate. Thank you to those who said love. Absolutely. And human gotta be part of something larger than the self. It doesn't have to be religion. We now have so many other things that we can join together and pursue a noble end with those that we respect. So we can do all of these things. And now just to bring it home finally to the title of this conference, which is Being Human in a Digital Age. What will it be to be human in a digital age? I think it's exactly the same as the pre-digital age. Only technology makes all of these certainly different, and I think generally better. So that's the end of the story. It was my story in 8 chapters about where we started, how we got here, how we became human, and how morality in particular made us human. It's a story of increasing connectivity, and what a long, strange trip it's been. Thank you.